aiming at a target and firing single shots. Is there some kind of a time frame? Because I would have thought that a single shot rifle, each time you reload, you fire, that would be just as accurate as one that automatically reloads.
Mr. Flood,
I just want to, how can you explain where the competitive edge lends into this?
Let's let Mr. Flood in here. He's the expert, I think, on this.
There's plenty of ways that it can be of an advantage. One of the ways is that when you're shooting long distance, you've got to deal with a thing called external ballistics. And so that would be the wind conditions. And so it could be wind, it could be mirage, it could be a number of different things. And so what you may, a situation may happen whereby you get a particular type of wind. And so you know that it's going to blow your round off a particular distance. So what you'll do is you'll make allowances on your scope, and then you'll make up for that continuous wind that you're seeing.
Yeah.
And what you try to do is you try to shoot with the wind. So what you'll do is you'll use a semi-automatic, will reload the round, and you can fire, let's say, one round every couple of seconds. Yeah? And that's one of the advantages in relation to the external ballistics. So not only, as Declan says, can you get a break away from having to come out of the rifle, reload the bolt, pull the bolt back, reload the round back in again and get down, which is going to take about a few seconds, a couple of seconds. But also you'll get to hold position on target, as well as defeat any kind of wind characteristics that may be there. And it is used by competitors in other countries and other jurisdictions. So
using the bolt will change your position, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it will. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of guys will train, and they have equipment, jackets and slings and things, which will bring them in around the rifle very, very, very tight. However, you can get an additional advantage in relation to shooting some competitions and some type of competitions with that semi-automatic. Definitely.
Mr. Belinsky?
Yes, there's a couple of other points that I'd like to raise, and one of them is with animal husbandry. If you're taking a follow-on shot, having acquired a target, you want to be able to shoot the animal instantly, in case you do a bad shot to begin with. The semi-automatic platform allows for that a lot more quickly, with a lot more ease than, say, cycling the bolt yourself, because you're then moving away from the target, and that's one issue. The other issue as well is that this is actually serious, the elderly shooters, a semi-automatic platform, just by nature of the way that the platform is manufactured and works, is a lot softer on your shoulder when you shoot. I've had a shoulder injury before, and I went to using my semi-auto platform because it was just nicer while I was recovering, and you can get a hell of a kick off the 308. So it's better on the semi-auto platform for certain reasons.
Okay, Mr. Crofton, sorry, I'll come back to you. Mr. Crofton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just in relation to Mr. Kenny did raise the issue or mention the issue of stolen firearms as contained in the report, and that's the particular issue I wish to address in relation to the figures and the statistics. I mean, I have great issue with the statistics, because depending on who you listen to and where the question is posed, you tend to get a different statistic in relation to this particular matter. But even taking the figure as quoted by the Gardaí in the report, 1,134 stolen firearms in the period 2010 to 2013. I just want to bring the committee's attention to that. I mean, that represents 0.554% of all firearms licensed in the state during that period. And if you take it on an annual basis, it's 0.138%. It is minuscule. We had the Minister last week. May I just say that on the 17th of December, we had the Gardaí before the committee, or the joint group before the committee, in which it was alluded to that 45 guns in relation to semi-automatic shotguns would be affected. And that, again, I have issue with that statistic. There are 8,700 semi-automatic shotguns licensed in the state. They are the favoured shooting tool of farmers, if I can just inform the committee. And to have one which is restricted in its manufacture. If you look at the recommendation in the report, it says that is manufactured not to hold, and the operative word is manufactured. There is no semi-automatic shotgun that is manufactured in which the magazine cannot be changed. So that's a particular problem. And that, of course, would mean that every semi-automatic shotgun in the country would be affected by these proposals. And that's a hell of a lot more than 45. And then, you know, we had the minister only last week in the Dáil in response to a question, I think from Deputy Collins, if I'm not mistaken, in which she stated that in relation to this matter, only, and I just note the use of the word only, 6% of firearms would be affected. Well, that's now 12,000 firearms would be affected. So you see the difficulty I have with these movable figures and statistics going all over the place. And in relation, I just want to make one last point in relation to this. In relation to the figure of 1,134 firearms, the committee may not be aware, but that figure includes deactivated firearms, starting pistols which don't fire anything at all. It includes humane killers, for example, which would be stolen from vets and so on. It would also include firearms stolen from firearms dealers' premises. In other words, a great many firearms that are not actually sitting with firearms license, ordinary firearms licensing holders, but the theft of those are being laid at our doorstep, as it were, as a justification for this report. And this is one of the reasons why this becomes rather offensive to sport shooting people.
Mr. Kenny, sorry, Mr. Sims, you wanted to come in in response again to Mr. Kenny's question.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain something I think Mr. Kenny may not understand. Is the difference in semi-automatic and bolt action. Semi-automatic and bolt action are pretty much the same because you have to pull the trigger. The action has to work after you pull the trigger. In other words, you can't hold your finger on the trigger and keep firing rounds. You must let go and pull the trigger again. So there is a delay in between one shot and the next, and you have to consciously take one shot after another. You can't just blast the thing out of the sky, which I think one of the problems that the terminology assault rifle brings to mind with people is that you have something that you can run around the streets and spray lead in all directions. There's nothing like that on license in this country, and a semi-automatic rifle is virtually no different from a bolt-action rifle in terms of how it works, except for that you don't have to operate a bolt. The machine does that for you.
Okay. Mr. Keogh, you indicated?
Yes, there's just 2 points I'd like to make. Just one to finish off the discussion and the question that Deputy Kenny asked in relation to assault rifles. I think it's very important to point out that semi-automatic centerfire rifles are classified as restricted firearms. So therefore, an individual who applies for a semi-automatic license is required to have a much, much higher standard of requirement for that particular firearm than would be for a standard firearm. And again, I don't think that this has been emphasised by Garda Síochána. It's akin to a license for a pistol of higher calibre in that they must make application to the Chief Superintendent. They must show single cause for having that particular firearm. And I don't believe that these licenses have been given out lightly. So therefore, I think they're very, very strong contention that they should remain. The second point I'd like to make is that I live in North County Dublin, and I empathise with what you're saying in relation to the loss of life. It's regrettable. And I do take grave exception to the contention and the evidence given from Chief Superintendent Healy, in which he was describing the fact that they were unable to separate the potential that a licensed firearm might be used in crime because they had not been recovered. Now, again, I refer back to the 2006 legislation, and I think it's terribly disingenuous because within the 2006 legislation, there is a facility for Garda Síochána to ballistically test and ballistically signature each firearm in this country. And indeed, I would refer to Northern Ireland, where more than 13,500 handguns are licensed. Every single licence for a firearm, for a handgun in Northern Ireland, requires the owner to hand it in for ballistic testing. That means that the bullet and the cartridge is kept on file and is digitally retrievable and can be identified. So therefore, at a crime scene, if a bullet is recovered, it can then be matched against the bank of lawfully held firearms to absolutely outrule the implication that any firearm has been used in the crime. Finally, what I would say that with over 14,000, and I keep changing my numbers, but we know that it's a vast number in Northern Ireland in relation to handguns. The RUC and or the PSNI in Northern Ireland have never discovered a lawfully held pistol having been used in crime that hasn't been stolen. So, from the point of view of the evidence that was given by the Garda Síochána, they have it in their gift to ballistically test the 600 and odd centre-fire firearms. And make no mistake, into the future then they have absolutely no problem with ensuring that they can guarantee that the firearm used in the crime was not legally held. And I would contend that that is the case. Absolutely, I'd make that strong point.
Okay. Another question, Mr.
Yeah, the
sorry,
question-
I'm sorry, Mr. Hennigan, you indicated as well you wanted to respond. I'll get you in again then, yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. Just in response to Deputy Kenny's question regarding assault rifles, and in my opening statement I mentioned in terms of flaws within the report, and in particular I draw your attention to Section 4, proposed amendments to the Firearms Act, where regarding conditions for the granting of firearm certificate. Without going through the full list, but some of the proposed amendments that would warrant refusal for a firearms permit would be the lethality of the firearm, the size and shape and appearance of the firearm. And my colleagues have gone through in detail in terms of describing the differences. I suppose, and so on and so on. In our day-to-day dealings with members of Garda Síochána, we can find in one Garda district a certain firearm is granted to one of our members, where if you travel down the road over an imaginary line into another Garda district, a person of a similar background could be refused for the same firearm. And it demonstrates the inconsistency. And it is of real concern to our members in terms of this proposed amendment to Section 4 of the Act, that it exacerbates that issue going forward.
Okay, thank you. Final question.
The question of the calibre of the rifles, I think you mentioned .22 rifles. Are there rifles of a higher calibre than that used in target shooting and sports?
Okay, who wants to take
How would be the highest calibre weapon that you would use in target shooting?
I don't mean to sort of be the overriding voice at the meeting here today, but I do feel that I need to answer that question. The reality of it is that I think the number of the calibre is totally irrelevant, because people say that high-powered rifles and high-calibre firearms, a high-calibre pistol was used in a murder. Well, my goodness, it really doesn't matter what you're killed with, if it's a small calibre or a high calibre. All firearms,
the higher calibre might do more damage.
All firearms are lethal. And that's why they're regulated to such a high degree. They're very, very well regulated. You have to have everything in place to have a firearm. So, even from the point of view of that, it's the person, the original tenet of the Firearms Act from 1925 was that a determination was made that the person was suitable to acquire or own a firearm. Now, the diversity of firearms, the calibers of firearms, the make and type of firearms is so diverse that once you're qualified to be a firearms owner, that should be it. That should be the last question. There are, and to answer your question, sorry, there are major differences between calibers. We have .22 and then we have much larger caliber rounds, but their designation doesn't necessarily tell the story about their size. It's a very complex and technical area.
Okay. Mr. Belinsky.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, actually. There is an awful lot of emphasis being placed on the platform and on the caliber and on the capacity, and really it's down to the individual, Maybe further checks and balances could be put in place to ensure that the individual behind the platform is a lot more competent. But the object in itself is really inanimate.
Okay.
Final question.
You had the final question. I come back to
well, I know.
I'll come back to
Well, this is my final. I want
to
to thank everybody for the replies.
Okay. So
my final question is: you mentioned.
Sorry, Deputy Kenny. We agreed earlier 3 questions each, and then
Okay.
we'll come back to you.
This is my final one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you had 3 already.
Well, one really was a supplementary on the question of caliber of weapon. Really.
Go on.
Yeah, this is my final question. It's to do with deer stalking and deer shooting, and is the purpose of the deer shooting, is that for sport or is it for culling of deer?
All right, Mr. Hennigan. I think you might be best placed to ask that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose in terms of deer stalking or deer management, like deer stalkers carry out a very important role in the countryside. In the absence of natural predators, it falls on man to manage or deer populations. So it's very much the case when people are involved in deer management, it is effectively a job that they're undertaking, as opposed to doing something for fun.
Okay.